146. The destruction of Carthage and Corinth. 146. The destruction of Carthage and Corinth. The mailed fist foreign policy of Rome is strikingly evidenced by the complete destruction within 3 months of each other of the two major commercial cities of the Mediterranean, Carthage in the west and Corinth in the east. Carthage was razed because of panicky fear of the military revival of Rome's most deadly enemy of the past. According to Livy, the Senate decreed the destruction of Corinth because of the outrage done there to Rome envoys. It is more likely that the act was brutally warning to the ever-troublesome Achaeans. Delenda est de Carthago. The last of Cato's acts of state is thought to have been the destruction of Carthage. Indeed, it was Scipio the Younger who gave it its death blow, but it was chiefly on the counsel and advice of Cato that Romans undertook the war. For the following reason: Cato was sent to the Carthaginians and to Massinissa, the Numidian, who were at war with each other, to investigate the cause of their dispute. Massinissa had been a friend of the Roman people from the beginning, and the Carthaginians had entered into treaty relations with Rome after their defeat by Scipio. Having been deprived of their empire and burdened with a heavy tribute of money, Cato found the city not, as the Romans thought, in distress and low estate, but rather possessing an abundance of men of fighting age, overflowing with great wealth and filled with arms of all kinds and military equipment, and not a little proud of all this. He therefore thought that it was not a time for the Romans to adjust the affairs of Massinissa and the Numidians, but rather that they themselves would again be involved in the same dangers unless they repressed the city which had been Rome's ancient, irreconcilable enemy, now so unbelievably grown. Therefore, returning speedily to Rome, he advised the Senate that the former defeats and calamities of the Carthaginians had diminished not so much their power as their foolhardiness, and were likely to render them not weaker, but more experienced in war. That they were but skirmishingly with the Numidians to prepare themselves for a contest with the Romans, that the peace and treaty were but names to discuss their postponement of war until a proper occasion presented itself. Moreover, they said that, shakingly his toga, he purposely let drop some African figs in the Senate, and then, on their admiring their size and beauty, he said that the country that produced them was only 3 days' sail from Rome. And he was even more violent in this, that whenever he declared his opinion in the Senate on any matter whatsoever, he added the following: "And I also think that Carthage must be destroyed." The razing of Carthage. Thus Scipio took Carthage, and he sent to the Senate the following message: "Carthage is taken. What are your orders now?" When these words had read, they took counsel as to what should be done. Cato expressed the opinion that they ought to raze the city and blot out the Carthaginians, whereas Scipio Nasica still advised sparing the Carthaginians. And thereupon the Senate became involved in a great dispute and contention until someone declared that for the Romans' own sake, if for no other reason, it must be considered necessary to spare them. With this nation for antagonists, they would be sure to practice valor instead of turning aside to pleasures and luxuries, whereas if those who were able to compel them to practice warlike pursuits should be removed from the scene, they might deteriorate from want of practice through a lack of worthy competitors. As a result of the discussion, all became unanimous in favor for destroying Carthage, since they felt sure that its inhabitants would never remain entirely at peace. The whole city was therefore utterly blotted out of existence, and it was decreed that for any person to settle upon its site should be an accursed act. The majority of the men captured were thrown into prison and there perished, and some few were sold. But the very foremost men, together with the hostages and Hasdrubal and Bithias, spent the rest of their lives in different parts of Italy in honorable confinement. Scipio secured both glory and honor and was called Africanus, not after his grandfather but of his own achievements. The sack of Corinth. As soon as night fell, the Achaeans who had escaped to Corinth after the battle fled from the city, and most of the Corinthians fled with them. At first, although the gates were open, Mommius hesitated to enter Corinth, suspecting that some ambush had been laid within the walls. But on the third day after the battle, he proceeded to storm Corinth and set it on fire. The majority of those found in it were put to the sword by the Romans, but the women and children Mommius sold into slavery. He also sold all the slaves who had been set free and had fought on the side of the Achaeans, but had not fallen at once on the field of battle. The most admired votive offering and works of art were carried off by Mommius. The less valuable he gave to Philopomen, the general sent by Attalus, and even in my day there were Corinthian spoils in Pergamum. In all the cities that had made war against Rome, Mommius demolished the walls and disarmed the inhabitants before commissioners were sent from Rome. And when these arrived, he proceeded to put down democracies and establish governments based on property qualifications. Tribute was imposed upon Greece, and those who had money was forbidden to acquire property outside their own state. Ethnic leagues, whether of Achaean or Phocians or Boeotians or anywhere else in Greece, were likewise all dissolved. A few years later, the Romans, taking pity on Greece, restored the old ethnic leagues and the right to acquire property abroad, and cancelled the fines imposed by Mommius. For he had ordered the Boeotians to pay 100 talents to the peoples of Heraclea and Euboea, and the Achaeans to pay 200 to the Lacedaemonians. The Greeks obtained from the Romans a remission of those payments, but down to my day a governor continues to be sent to the country.